It was just to get you guys hyped up for this. You gotta love power outages. So we'll go ahead and restart and let's keep it going, guys.
Awesome. Well, I'll jump back into kind of where I was providing some of my intro. But I was talking a little bit about that I was at LinkedIn, enabling LinkedIn folks on how to sell the Glint product, as well as the Glint product evolved training and enabling the Glint team to sell Glint. So it was a pretty bonkers mandate. And honestly, the reason I'm here is I couldn't have done it without Guru to help me scale. So it always sort of been the dream to one day work at Guru, and somehow they thought the same. So here we are. And as you probably gathered, I love the product, but I also love this space. And I think that's kind of why I'm here, like getting the chance to chat with other enablers, other sales leaders, sort of on the everyday and be sort of in that milieu is something that I really love. And Nikki is like at the top of all of that. So I'll share a little bit more why I'm so excited, but I would love to have Nikki give her intro, and I'll shut up for a little bit.
I'm just so excited to be here with Chad and all of you. This is great. So I'm Nikki Schanzer. I'm the Director of Revenue Enablement at Outreach. And yeah, I'm like, how do I consolidate where I came from? I basically sold for 10 years. And then all throughout that, I thought, like, what makes me good at what I do? And it was about leveraging my skills. I love efficiency and the operations around sales, and would package that up and enable my team around me. And at the time, I think enablement was slowly but surely becoming more of a thing. And got the chance when I started working at Dropbox, the entire enablement team left, and I was like, pick me. So I just kind of rolled up my sleeves and got the opportunity, which was wonderful. And then worked my way up at Dropbox to lead North America, LATAM, and Canada. And then worked across a global team, which was really fun. Then I went to Hopin and started the function from scratch, which was a wild ride. And now here I am at Outreach, leading such a talented and amazing team. So that's me.
I love that. I love like all of the varied experience that you have, Nikki, and I'm like so excited to learn from you. And I think in some ways, like you and I have been sort of chasing each other around this enablement world, and we've both done tours at LinkedIn at different times. You hired someone that I hired. Shout out to Erica, who's probably listening.
Yay.
And, now my boss here at Guru, the CRO, worked with you at Dropbox. So there's just all these sort of like layers upon layers. And it's so fun. I think like this world is a Kevin Bacon world where everything's so connected. And I think, we need to remember to treat each other well. And I think we all do, because we know you never know what's around the corner. So with that, like, I'm just so excited to chat more with you, because I've always looked at you as just like this like creative powerhouse, and you think about problems and you think about sort of our space in such a fun way. And so please like infuse as much of that as you can, because I'm looking to learn how to be better.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'm to turn the color of my sweater. I shouldn't have worn pink. So thank you.
Of course. So let's like draw some lines in the sand. I know this like webinar is about trust and the idea of trust within enablement, within sales teams, within sort of like this changing dynamic of our teams being remote and hybrid, and figuring all of those things out. So like, let's draw a line in the sand. How would you define like a culture of trust? Because that's probably a great place to start, and then we can build from there.
Yeah, I'm going to keep this answer simple, because I know I'll gab on for other questions. But I think building a culture of trust is all about everyone inherently knowing that your team, the leadership team, not only have everyone's backs, but they're there to provide the best of whenever possible. And beyond that, I think some of it, especially in today's macroeconomic environment, I find that trust has been built through moments of vulnerability and sort of falling on your sword. We're all figuring out this new world. And I think it's so important now that people aren't pretending that we all have anything figured out right now. So some of that falling on the sword, I think, is just admitting moments when maybe we don't know the answer. So I think that helps with building trust, among other things. But I'd love to hear from you. What's your definition of trust?
Yeah, no, I love that idea of like we're all sort of in this new sort of phase together, and there's not like there are veterans, there are folks that are getting up to speed, but at the same time the dynamic is so new
Mhm.
and constantly changing that if we come at it from sort of that vulnerable place or that place of equality, I think we can grow a lot quicker. It's so funny, like we thought about these things together before we kind of came on here, and then I'm really realizing like my idea of trust is so similar to yours, but I kind of want to tell a story to frame how I think about it. And this is a story that I can't seem to get out of my head. I've had it in my head for a couple of years, but I think trust within a team, it really sort of centers around this idea of like, you talked about falling on your sword. And I think falling kind of fits into this story. So I'll just sort of tell it. Like when they were building the Golden Gate Bridge, the industry norm was like 1 death per every $1 million. And the bridge was estimated to cost 35 million bucks when they were starting to build it. So like, it's going to get a little morbid here, but like the chief engineer, when he was doing all this, was like, I'm going to beat the norms. Like, I'm not going to just settle for, 35 deaths. So he built a safety net underneath the whole Golden Gate Bridge, like all 1.5 miles of it. 19 people fell and none of them died. And actually, like, yes, this is going to be a weird pivot, but they also like increased their productivity 25%. And they did stuff like that they thought was impossible. Like they built the cables 4 times faster than they thought was humanly possible. So I like to riff on this idea. Like that to me is what trust is. It's this sort of like network, this netting, this framework that we as enablers, that we as sales leaders put underneath our teams so that they can do their best work, so that they can fall safely. But like you were talking about, but also so that they know that there's a framework that will support them, so that they can take the risks that they take every day. So curious, like drop in the chat if that was too morbid, or if you have other ideas about how you define trust in sort of our world. But that's kind of how I approach it.
I love the safety net concept for sure. I think that's absolutely it. Like people always want to know that there's another option or another way, especially now. I think that especially when things feel unknown, it's more important than ever that people feel that safety net, so to speak.
Totally.
I'm actually curious from your perspective, high level, why do you think trust matters in the context of building, high performing, engaged sales teams?
I think it comes down to that risk, right? Like salespeople are doing some of the hardest work. We're asking them to basically knock on doors and get a lot of no's, and really push through a lot of barriers and a lot of like hard, difficult situations. And I think, especially in this economic climate, to have that netting and that framework of knowing like they can fall, that they can be vulnerable, that they can be risky, I think is so, so important. I think also kind of in a weird way, trust can kind of be this funny transaction where if our teams trust us, if they trust leadership, if they do those things, they'll like, if they do the things that we are asking of them, they'll actually be more effective, which kind of goes back to my story. And then I think it also goes back to the organization as a whole, marketing, product, engineering, like trusting that sales will circle back, that they'll sort of put these things forward and they'll circle back because they are sometimes the frontest line, and share that so that the whole org is high achieving, not just, the sales team. I'm curious, like, what's your take?
Yeah, I think what was coming to mind when you were saying that is, thinking about something that we've been focused on at Outreach, which is, what is that handoff process? Like, how do you make sure that you are stacking hands to provide not only a great customer experience, but so there's less friction internally? I think a lot about, to your point about safety nets and coming up with frameworks and all of that, it's sometimes the simplest stuff, all the foundation stuff that needs to be put in place for people to go, okay, at the very least, I know how to do these critical things
100%.
that help me be successful and probably help me win more business. I may take a different angle a little bit, probably more tactical. I don't know, maybe jaded, who knows? But I think a lot about salespeople because we talk to them every day and, really support them and partner with them in the business. And I think that there's this level of skepticism with sales. I think it's probably anyone, right? But because that is the audience that I've been working so closely with for so long, I think there's always this pressure as an enablement person, like, I gotta nail this because the level of I'm trying to think of like the right word. Basically, the leniency is not as great as we would like it to be. And the moment something doesn't feel relevant enough, it's so easy to lose focus and tune out. And the better you are at understanding what salespeople need and how they need it, or any go-to-market team, like giving them what they need, when they need it, how they need it, and being a partner in that way, I think continuously builds trust. But I read this article about the neuroscience of trust in a Harvard Business Review. And I'm going to throw some data points at you here, but there was a quote in there that said, compared with people at low trust companies, people at high trust companies report that 74% less stress, 106% more energy at work, 50% higher productivity, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their lives, and 40% less burnout. And as I was thinking about that, I was, naturally you go like, this is so critical, of course, like obviously, but I think that it's all of those things. I think personally, we've all been struggling with in general, especially in the last few years. And so I think it's more critical now than ever, but it just shows you that it's something that people actually need to focus on a lot. And if you're walking into an audience and presenting to an audience that is kind of skeptical to begin with, you have to use tactics to really like win them over.
Totally. And I think in our role, I love all of those stats because they're reminders for us in leadership, us in enablement, in revenue enablement. Like, if we're not doing it, there's probably not a lot of other teams doing it. Like, we are some of that. That's some of our role, and maybe it's not written out in our job descriptions or in what we're comped on, but like, that is our sort of like sphere of influence and kind of calling to apply that across our teams. And I think like, what a great reminder that those stats matter. And like, if we can do those things, like, we'll be off to the races.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, we've talked about sort of defining it. Why does it matter? How important it is? What are some of the things that you've seen like prevent trust or sort of like disengage it, kind of create a roadblock or a hiccup in sort of building it or facilitating it?
Yeah. I think one of the things, I'll tell you a story about going through an acquisition one time where trust was like so broken that I saw it permeate. So I was at a company, we made an acquisition, and the day we acquired them is the day that Enablement found out about it.
Oh, wow.
And it was fascinating to see, not that we are the end all be all, that's not what I'm saying here, but the difference between capitalizing on moments of importance. Yes, there are lots of secrets to be held when you're going through acquisition, and it's a very I mean, up to the wire, there's a lot of pressure to get it right from the acquisition standpoint. But I realized like maybe it's important for me as an enabler in the future to partner with M&A and get them to understand why it's so critical. Because what ended up happening is something huge like that happens, and every go-to-market person goes, cool, how do I talk about this?
Yep.
And what ended up happening is it was unfortunate because it wasn't our fault that trust was lost with us because we didn't know, but it absolutely was something that we had to build up from. And what I noticed is we got really scrappy. We did all the things that we believed were right. We put together tons of, I mean, it was like ad hoc training, like all the things that kind of feel icky in the moment. It's like, oh, I'm just trying to like hot glue gun this thing together and give people what they need. And what I think, because we didn't take a step back and go, okay, this is messy, but what do we want to do for the next 3 months? It just turned into this, it felt like Band-Aid after Band-Aid. And I can tell you that it took probably 2 years, 2 full years to go, okay, people are finally talking about this in the right way. And I don't think that it was just that enablement didn't know, but do I think that we could have shortened that timeline? 100%.
Yeah.
So I think that was a moment where I really felt like that was a roadblock to trust. And that was a fall on your sword moment, even though we had nothing to do with not being told. We did the best we could, but we still lost credibility in that way. And so I think that as long as an audience knows that you have their back, it takes like being really in the field. I think that's some of the area where it felt like we kind of could build ourselves up quickly again, is every rep had felt already that we were always trying to do what was best for them. And that helps a little, but you really gotta you gotta pick up the pieces really quickly. So that was just an example I thought of immediately that came to mind, where I was like, oof, we were in a tough spot.
I think like I love, like I always say, I love that response, because everything you say is pretty gold. But I think like that analogy of it like stirs up for me like this idea of context. And I think there may be folks on the call who are sort of like just getting started in their enablement journey, or are a one-person team, and they're trying to find some influence, and they're trying to find like ways to sort of grow enablement. And I think asking for a seat at the table is really, really hard. But that context helps you avoid having to dig out for 2 years. I've seen it my own self. You obviously saw it. Like, maybe I should partner with M&A. Maybe I should partner more with sales leadership. Maybe I should partner more with the CEO, so they understand things are going on. And it's not to be a gossip, or not to like just get undue sort of seat at the table. But that context is really everything for us, because then we build the credibility going forward, and we're not caught flat-footed.
Yeah. It's so, one thing that I've been trying out that's, I've been thinking it's working well, we'll see. But I've been trying to, I think a lot of times for enablement folks, we're always like, we should be at the table, like include us. But what I've tried to switch my talk track to is, here is exactly where I can help you. And I've been really trying to be prescriptive about that. I can inherently, and my team inherently knows our audience better than most. So if you have an idea, we're never going to say the idea is bad, but we will be able to educate you on the how and the what and the format and the approach, and the timing specifically. I've been thinking a lot about that. But we also can identify risk faster than pretty much anyone. And it's due to the context that we have. It doesn't benefit us to, like, we're not beholden to the same things that everyone else is that make them laser focused on their area. It's our job to focus across the organization. So I think that I've said this a lot. I'm just waiting for someone to truly take advantage of where we can really shine, which is at the table. We're able to call out things that no one else would be able to. And
Totally.
being the voice of our customer and having trust there is absolutely the way we do that.
Totally. I think this question's fun. I feel like we could riff for a while on it, because I certainly failed so much, and like have a lot of learnings for creating my own roadblocks. But I think that context, however you want to think about the context, it doesn't always have to be a seat at the table. I think it can also be not creating stuff just in a vacuum where the context is just your own context, but thinking about it in the context of how is sales going to apply this? How can we do this in a way that like sort of like keeps the aperture open, keeps the seat at the table for our stakeholders as well, like kind of passing that context down to them and involving them. I know that you and I've talked a little bit about pilots and focus groups and involving teams. I've certainly seen like situations where I've done this in a vacuum, rolled it out, and then just sat there and watched, like been in the room when sales leadership just pulls out their phone and starts scrolling. And like, I totally missed the point, right? Like I didn't bring them along. I didn't, bring my stakeholders into the context and give them sort of that seat at the table that I've been demanding for. So I think we could riff on this for a while. I'm sure we'd probably get some good chuckles, but I think there's probably some ways we can pivot to how you can build this and some of the ways that we've seen that.
Yeah. I mean, from your perspective, what about, so I know we've talked about like what can prevent, what are some of the common roadblocks, right? What do you think some of the common mistakes are that managers or enablement make that cause distrust?
Gosh, well, I make them all the time, but it makes me think about like my time at Glint, where I spent a lot of time behind the scenes. And I think, I'm going to throw out a buzzword that's probably real for all of us in enablement, but like, I certainly felt some imposter syndrome. I'd never carried a bag like you. So I never was in a sales role. And so I was constantly trying to stay one step behind, sort of like taking that risk, and like being in front and kind of like second guessing myself. And I think like my team couldn't really see me trying new things along with them. And I think that's a mistake that we as leaders can make, we as enablers can make. I think sales managers, and like revenue managers can also make that mistake by sort of staying too high above the fray. But here I was asking reps to do some of the hardest things on top of their already hard everyday job. And then they couldn't see me taking risks. So I think later on at a couple other different roles, I had to build out new things that were like much more customer facing. And I was in the weeds with them, building the demo, teaching them the demo, doing it myself, doing the messaging myself. And I think not only did that sort of kick the imposter out of my mind a little bit, because I had some of that credibility, but I think it also, it built that trust with the team that like, oh, Chad knows what he's talking about. I can take this forward. I can run it forward. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, there's this sense of empathy that we need to have with our team, that like, we're in it with them. Like to your point earlier, that like, we can be in it with them, but we sometimes have to pick up the pieces and move really quickly. And I think the more that we are sort of in those places, the more context we're going to bring and the more credibility we have.
Yeah. I love that you brought this up, because I think I've had a lot of enablement people come to me from, just our enablement community is so amazing. I feel like I just love meeting new people. And I've had some say things like, I've never sold, like, that scares me. How do I have credibility? I think that's a perfect thing to call out that you surface, which is I got in there, I leaned in, I was able to kind of understand what my audience needed and then built something. It's all proof. Like, how do you those proof moments where people are going, okay, they do get it? Because what's hard, and go with me on this journey, Chad, is I'm thinking about like confidence in general, I think there's just something, I've always felt it, especially when I was doing a lot of training, is I always felt like when I walked into a room, this is the response I would get. Like, who are you to tell me how to do my job?
Mhm.
Like, that was always like the thing I felt, whether that was real or my own stuff. And then I always felt like, ugh, I have to tell them I sold before. Like,
Yep.
but I always felt like, oh God, like I have to, that's my credibility piece to shut down that, like, kind of, prove to me you know what you're doing. And self-imposed or not, it's something that is in the room in some way, shape, or form. And so I think it helped that I had sold. But one thing I want to bring up is this. So I don't know, have you ever heard of Chris Voss?
Yes.
You put so I love this book, Never Split the Difference. And I actually read it and then I listened to the audiobook because he's like from the East Coast and I just like, he's so cool. Like I was, so this is like an audiobook one where you're not like annoyed by the voice. It's so
Okay,
good.
good.
Loved it. And he talks about, I want to bring up this tactic that he used, and it's called an accusations audit. And I think that this this may seem like a stretch in some way, but to me, this has helped build trust because I've tested it a few times, so I'll share it. But it's a tactic that allows you to basically take inventory of your situation. And what you're doing is you're looking for all the possible negatives, the names, the accusations, the slanderous things that someone in the room might be thinking or feeling. Not to say that that's actually happening, but based on environment, like people have things going through their head and you can feel that. And so it allows you to call it out first. And the result ends up in this collaborative relationship right away. And so I'll give you an example of how I used it. So maybe it's not so like meta. So I was working on this project and it was tied to revamping sales stages, which everyone knows is not a super sexy project to work on and very heated. And if anybody has that on their plate right now, like hit me up. I will send you empathy at the very least. But like everyone has an opinion. Every single person has a say. They want to be involved. They know exactly how they want their sales process done. And so I was sort of sensing this. I'd get like, oh, I hear you working on this. Have you thought about this? Like I was getting all of that. And I had a deadline, couldn't hear everyone's opinions, and it wasn't actually helping me complete the project. And I knew of one person in particular who was very upset with me for not including them in my core group. And she booked time to talk to me about it. Ooh. And I was like, okay, I'm going to walk into fire. Great. And so I, at the time I'd been reading this book and I thought, okay, how do I potentially test out a tactic here? I have nothing to lose. And instead of just walking in and sitting there and having her tell me how upset she was, I thought, I need her to trust that I'm doing the right thing and that I know I'm not going to get anything perfectly, but I need her to trust that I have thought of including the right people and I'm thinking about the right things. And so I walked in and I used an accusations audit. And what that looked like was I said, listen, I know before we even jump in, I know what you're thinking. I cannot believe that Nikki didn't include me in this planning process. She's running rogue. She's not doing her due diligence to make this project great. And she's not thinking of the right things. I was like, so I totally understand where you're coming from. I have a feeling that's what we're talking about today. And the response I got was, oh my God, don't be so hard on yourself. I know that this has been such a hard project to manage. And that's exactly how I needed her to respond. Because had I not come in with the accusations audit, I have a feeling should have been like, why am I not included? What is going on? And so I kind of just called out the things that were going on that were potentially going to be uncomfortable. And immediately it transformed our conversation. She let me know the things that she cared about, but it wasn't from you aren't thinking about them. It's, I just want to be heard. And so a way to think about this is tied to, there's an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room doesn't go away by pretending it's not there. The elephant in the room doesn't go away by you saying, there is not an elephant in this room.
Yep.
And so the elephant in the room is diminished and eventually goes away by you saying, hey, there's an elephant in here. And so I think it's tied to trust. And if you have a trust problem, you have to recognize it before you can solve for it. You have to name it. So I know that was a long-winded like going back, but this tactic really, really helped me navigate like a really tough situation. And after that, it was just like thick as thieves, like really just making sure that we need trust going forward. She knew I was considering her. So what about you?
What a great story, Nikki. Like, I feel like it plays on so many of the themes that we've already been talking about, right? Like that creates a culture of trust. You probably knew going in to some degree, there was some trust there, some net you could sort of fall into, and then you could sort of take that risk to have that conversation. I feel like I've been in a lot of situations that was kind of triggering for me, that story, because I've been in similar situations where I haven't done the audit. I haven't listened to this audiobook. I haven't applied the risk or taken the risk that you did. And like, I end up defending myself in those situations and trying to like manufacture that I have thought of everything. And I think there's also an element of humility in sort of saying, I kind of know what you're thinking. I don't have everything right, but I do want to say, like, I have involved all of these other pieces, and I'm glad we're having time, because there's probably some pieces that you can bring to me that I'm missing, but it works better in this sort of situation, and I didn't want to waste your time, or whatever, however you want to spin it. But I just love that story because there's like a sense of trust, a sense of humility on both sides. And I think, it just like encapsulates it for me. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely not long-winded. I think we should chat a little bit about like how we can continue to build trust on our teams. I think we've talked around some of the boundaries and that type of thing. I know I want to be conscious of time because I know there's a couple questions out there, but let's talk a little bit about like ways that we can build trust, within our teams and foster that.
Yeah, I want you to go first, Chad.
Okay. Thank you. I know I just talked a lot, but I think I'm just going to talk about some tactical ways, because I love these conversations sometimes when they're like kind of high level and we can think about them and apply them to ourselves. But I also think like there's not enough of these like, hey, I could go do this today, or I could start thinking about this today and apply it. One thing I think is pretty simple way to build trust is like, think about the tech stack that your team is using from an enablement standpoint. Sometimes we can't influence all the stuff that RevOps is doing or that marketing's doing, but the stuff that like we're the face of, I think can have a really big impact. And I think it can have a negative impact if it's not beneficial to an everyday and it's more of a drag. So I think like thinking about how do we put those together, if you're building one now, like think thoughtfully about your end user, like make sure that they can use it, make sure that they want to use it, make sure that it like doesn't take them too far out of their workflow. If you've inherited something that's like less than ideal, like make a show of thinking through it and tell your team like, hey, I understand there's these deficiencies. Here are some ways around those. And sort of show them some band-aids and get fun with it. Like create some videos, like set up a reminder in Slack to like show them a new way to use it once a week or something like that. And I think maybe share with them like you're taking the long way or you're playing the long game and that you're thinking about replacing a solution or changing the stack to really make it more beneficial for them. Because I think I've seen we really do sort of embody some of that stack, and we're seen as sort of it's seen as an extension of us. And I think we can build trust by doing that, because they probably interact with the tool more than they interact with us on a daily basis. And then the other, this is super tactical. I love this, like survey your team. You keep it simple, maybe run it once a quarter, 10 minutes, 15 minutes max. Ask the same sort of questions. But then like, so you have some benchmarks that you can kind of follow up on, but then like analyze the data, tell the team that you've heard them. I think that builds so much trust. And then that trust will fall flat if you don't do anything. So you have to sort of like build programs that sort of build those things up, and then tell them what you built up and tell them sort of the impact that it had. And I think that creates this like flywheel of trust. And I've seen it be like so beneficial for me coming into a new company, getting that off the ground right away and sort of building the trust right away. And if I've learned anything from employee engagement, being in employee engagement for a couple of years, like when teams feel that they're heard and they feel like people are acting on that feedback, like the sky's the limit for what they can perform and how much more they're engaged in all of those metrics that you talked about earlier. In other words, it just builds trust. So those are my two tactical ways: tech stack and survey your team.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to you about the music video I made to try to get adopted.
Yes. Yeah.
I was like, I messaged, we were launching Guru when I was at Hopin, and I was like, well, how can I get people to trust this new piece of technology? Rolling out technology isn't like, you're hoping for adoption, but it's never a big thing. And I remember telling you how I just messaged people on Slack and named a channel Dance Party. I said, just don't ask questions. Just send me you dancing to Michael Jackson's Pretty Young Thing. And like 10 seconds, or like looking for things in your house. I had no clue how to use like any video editing technology, but I knew someone who sang, and I knew I could write lyrics to the tune of the song, and launch this with it. It was like we were, instead of launching a tool, it was launching something, but with everybody that's in the audience dancing to my stupid song. And we got like 93% adoption in like, I think it was like 3 weeks. So I think that it was a really fun, granted, I attribute a lot of what we all got to do. I hope Erica's here. Erica blew our minds all the time at Hopin with her creative ideas, but just the cultural aspect of what was built at when I was at Hopin was really fun, because it was open runway to build trust through letting people know that it doesn't need to be a big formal thing that's perfect with a bow. Hopefully people can bleep me out, but we would say, get to your SFD, get to your shitty first draft. Like that's all you have to do. And it will be totally fine to be able to get that out there, because sometimes that's all people need. And I felt like it made us have trust with our audience because we were really close to them for that. And so I'll name like a few tactical things that I think are really helpful. One is, right now, especially, I think enablement we've been more programmatic over the years. And right now people want you like in the field. They want more, they want you closer. Businesses want to feel the impact day to day. So if you're doing things like deal reviews, what happens is leadership will go, hey, I need them to fill out this form and they need to come prepared with all this stuff. It's like, no, there should be no barrier to entry for anybody. Show up. And if everyone can walk out with at least one new idea of how to attack this deal, success. And so that takes a bit of coaching from enablement to leadership, because they want deal reviews have turned into this like high pressure environment. And to me, where I feel like we can add and build trust for the people we partner with and support is all about us being the voice in the room to manage through that and say, no, what idea can we give this person? How do we let them know that we have their back? You mentioned pilot groups. We've talked about that. Focus groups, surveying, all of those things I think are wonderful. Another way I'll leave you with this is, and I know this is like so tactical, but I think things like leveraging technology like Slack. We used to do Tuesday tips. I was just like, take it or leave it, but here's just a tip. Here's a snippet of a call somebody's doing, or something that someone said. Make sure that you leverage it. It's just like little bite-sized things that people can go, oh, that is a good idea. Maybe I could use it on my next call. Or competitions. We did a 30-second commercial competition. It was like, who wants to test it out? And building that, I think that builds a culture. It makes people feel connected, especially in a remote environment. And then they kind of like trust each other a little bit more, which shouldn't all fall on us, right?
Totally.
I mean, those are tactical, but I think recognizing people through their efforts is huge. And you can do that in so many ways by highlighting the people and that you're supporting.
Well, we've gotten a lot of, well, not a lot, but a few folks have said they want to see the video. So we'll cut to the video. Right
I
now.
have it.
No, I love that idea of like the SFD. I worked not at, but with Lessonly, and one of their formerly Lessonly, one of their like mission statements was share before you're ready. And I think like that idea builds the trust that we've been talking about, right? It puts something out there. It sort of like says, hey, I'm trying this. I'm trusting you to give me some feedback, or I'm trusting you to help me make this better. And I think as it like in our space, like it's so important to show that vulnerability because, you know, that builds the trust, but it becomes more fun when we're doing it together. And then you touched on something I want to jump, like, we don't have a ton of time and we've only actually had one question come in. So feel free to ask more questions, whoever's out there, bring them in. But you talked a little bit about creating trust between teams and creating trust between reps. And one of the questions was, you know, how do you create trust between AEs in particular and account management? I'm curious if you've grappled with that. My team's pretty close, so I can speak to that, but I'm curious like how you'd address that.
No, I'm like, do I take the lens of when I was over to account management and then I was because you always know there's like the repeat offenders. You're like, you're overselling this deal. Now I got to deal with it. I think that one of the ways that I've seen it work really well is coming up with there's a scenario here that matters, which is, are you getting the same accounts from the same person? If that's the case, it's all about framework, relationship building, ways of working. If not, I think that there are ways to be able to thread the loop between making it about the customer. So is the customer, usually people buy stuff, and that's not the same people who end up implementing it. And I think sort of letting go sometimes between those groups of what actually happens, like people can't be responsible for everything, but is there a shared piece of content or a shared a shared video or shared something where you can say, here's what you can expect from this point to set both people up for success. You know, for an account executive, it's their responsibility to make somebody feel very warm and fuzzy that they are purchasing this thing. And for an account manager, they have to follow that through. So sometimes people ask us about AEs and BDRs or SDRs too. It's like, understand that people have different responsibilities. How are they measured? Like really ensuring that people understand that it's about how everybody has a different end goal a lot of times. So understanding that first to make sure that people are just set up for success is good.
Yeah. I love, I keep saying I love that, but I do love that. I think my perspective, and I haven't dealt with this as much given sort of the nature of my teams, but one of the things that was a huge mistake on my part is not being close enough with sort of like frontline managers early on, because they'll filter this up. They understand those rubs. And I think the closer we are with managers, the closer we are to sort of understanding that and maybe making a change that's not at the rep level or the deal level, but sort of seeing what are the pieces, to your point, that like the handoff pieces, what are the sort of like softer pieces that we need to put in place, and sort of like filter that between manager teams. And I think when we can do that and manager teams are really strong as sort of like leadership teams, I think then those problems get solved. And so if those aren't connected well, certainly make the case to connect them. And then do one-on-ones with managers every other week, and like spend time individually. What's on your mind? What's happening? How can we fix this? What are the biggest problems? You also suss that out from some of your surveys. So again, another plug for the surveys, but I think like that manager piece can be really, really critical to sort of creating that trust to the question in there.
I always say that managers are the black hole of enablement.
Mm.
They don't choose to be, but like, I think now more than ever, I'm so glad you brought this up, because managers have so much on their shoulders right now. They always do, but it's a pretty thankless job, especially when things get hard. And you are working to protect your team from really hard things and that they're hearing above them. And you need them to perform in a market that's not performing.
Yep.
And there's emotional residual stuff that comes from that. So I think the best way that enablement people can build trust there is through sheer empathy. Like,
Totally.
I understand that this is so hard right now. How do we make your life a little bit easier?
Yep.
And just right now, it's just especially, it is so, the middle is just like, like, how do I just like protect myself and my team from all this noise? And then how do I motivate them when it's not a very motivational time? It's really hard.
And we can be that relational person. I found in like some of my conversations on those one-on-ones, like it's almost like a therapy session, because they're also getting beat up from the other side.
Yes.
Right? Like, and I think there's a sense where we can sort of step in again, back to building trust, but like we can be in the room with them, being their partner, and sort of like, hearing them out and letting them sort of like blow off some steam, because they can't always blow off steam to their team, because that looks bad, and they can't always blow off steam, upwind, because that looks bad as well. And I think we can sort of be a safe place for them. Another question that came in, and maybe I'll take the first stab at this.
Yeah, please do.
Where the question is, where should one start to build trust, or a culture of trust as a new leader in the org, where the sales org is siloed? That like second part is really, really interesting, where it's siloed. I'm curious, we could probably go on and on and on why it might be siloed or how to fix it. I think find connective ways. I'll come back to the survey. Like, when you can come back with hard data and you're not sort of saying, I feel this way, or I feel like we should do X, Y, and Z, but you can say, the team is not confident in these 3 things. And here are the programs that we need to do. And the collective team needs to do these things. Then the siloed teams are saying X, Y, and Z. I see a connection between these. Let's sort of build a program that connects those dots, and builds towards, something better. And as a new leader, if you're listening, you're doing sort of that listening tour, you're asking, and then you're following up on that feedback and communicating it, like you'll build that trust right away, and you'll have a real strong sense of credibility and I talked a little bit about this at the beginning, like you can have sort of that transaction, then you can sort of spend some of that credibility on sort of the next things that you want to do, because you've got that cachet. So that's how I'd answer that question.
I like it. Like credibility bucks.
Yeah, credibility bucks. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's so smart. I fundamentally agree with all of that. As a new leader, I think one of your most critical jobs, siloed or not, is building relationships as deeply and as wide as you can. The more people who know you exist,
yeah,
and your curiosity, I think, goes a long way. Sometimes when you're new, you just want to be not even when you're new, but as someone who is a connective dot between so many aspects of a business, whether you're siloed or not, you want people to consider you.
Yep.
They have to know you exist. They have to know where you fit in order to be able to consider you. So I think that somebody that I love so much, her name's Lauren Forrest. I worked with her at LinkedIn. We were paired together. She was my CSM. And she said to me, she's a really curious person. And she said, I just want to go do informational interviews. I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I just kind of want to go around and figure out what people do all day. I want to know what their jobs are. And it was amazing. It was like 15-minute conversations. She said, tell me what you do all day. And people love to speak about themselves. So
Totally. Oh gosh,
naturally,
yes.
and what it resulted in is her network grew exponentially internally, but it was more about people started considering her to be on their team. It's like, I don't know what happened. I said 15-minute conversation, but I think that's a great tactic when you're new somewhere, is just asking people, what do you do and how would we work together? And you will find that people start to consider you in new ways and include you, and they're able to connect you to different things. Like you said, it's like, I just need to know where to place you.
Yep.
And then attach you to it.
Yep. I also think you never know when those relationships are going to be needed, especially in enablement, given that we kind of are a hub to a lot of spokes, where you need to sort of reach out to that person and say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, or I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? And you can sort of call in and rely on that trust, not to come back and spend those credibility bucks. But there is sort of a good play. It's a good move to sort of have that internal network. Well, Nikki, this has been so fun. I love that we've like completely gone off the script that we built to just like answer these questions and riff. I do want to kind of like bring it back so we can wrap up. Like, what's like one thing, and we've talked about a lot of things in this call, like what's one thing somebody can take away from this call today to start building trust?
Ooh, I think that I'm going to take the simple answer here, which is not only know your elephants in the room, like that's the thing, just know where your blind spots are. But back to what we just talked about, build relationships so that you can stack up. I'm stealing from you, Chad, your credibility bucks. You're gonna need them, and know that once you do that, you are absolutely capable of being the voice of a lot of people. And it's such an important place to be in an organization, and you'll have everyone trusting you in no time at all.
Totally.
Here's Chad.
My thing, you probably already figured it out, is do that survey, but I think put a spin on it. Like, it becomes the voice of your team. It becomes the voice of go-to-market. And if you have that voice sort of in written form and you can kind of hold it up, you'll be much better at sort of what you do going forward. It'll color what you do, but you'll be that person that people come to and say, what is the voice of the go-to-market team? What is the voice of sales? What is the voice of CS? And I think those are really important places to be. And not only will you have a lot of influence, but I think you'll be much better at sort of answering the mail and building a high-performing, successful, engaged team.
Yeah. Oh, this was so fun. I'm
I
so
know.
always happy to see your face. And seeing Jacqueline and Erica in the chat, I was like, oh my God, I felt like I was back at Hoppin', like all the chats coming in, just gassing each other up. We're like, yeah. So
I know.
it's been so fun. Thank you so much for including me.
Absolutely. This has been an absolute ball. Thank you, Gina.
It's our pleasure. Thank you guys so much, Chad and Nikki, especially. I love this. This was an amazing webinar. For those of us that are watching from LinkedIn or from Zoom, if you registered for the event, you will receive a full recap in your email, probably by tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. And if you have any other additional questions or comments or anything, be sure to find Nikki and Chad also on LinkedIn as well. I'm sure they would love some connection. So thank you everybody for joining in. And again, thank you to Chad and Nikki, and we wish you guys a happy Thirsty Thursday.
Oh yeah, I like that. Cheers to everybody.
Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.